It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open.
The morning had dawned clear and cold, with a crispness that hinted at the end of summer. They set forth at daybreak to see a man beheaded, 20 in all, and Bran rode among them, nervous with excitement. This was the first time he had been deemed old enough to go with his lord father and his brothers to see the king's justice done. It was the 9th year of summer, and the 7th of Bran's life. The man had been taken outside a small holdfast in the hills. Robb thought he was a wildling, his sword sworn to Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. It made Bran's skin prickle to think of it. He remembered the hearth tales old Nan had told them. The wildlings were cruel men, she said, slavers and slayers and thieves.
Chapter 4. When Jane and Elizabeth were alone, the former, who had been cautious in her praise of Mr. Bingley before, expressed to her sister just how very much she admired him. "He is just what a young man ought to be," said she, "sensible, good-humoured, lively, and I never saw such happy manners. So much ease, with such perfect good breeding." "He is also handsome," replied Elizabeth, "which a young man ought likewise to be, if he possibly can. His character is thereby complete. I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment." "Did not you? I did for you. But that is one great difference between us. Compliments always take you by surprise, and me never."
Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose 8 descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most of the people living on it were unhappy for pretty much of the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper, which is odd because, on the whole, it wasn't the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. And so the problem remained. Lots of the people were mean, and most of them were miserable, even the ones with digital watches. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place, and some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. And then, one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, a girl, sitting on her own in a small cafe in Rickmansworth, suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all this time, and she finally knew how the world could be made a good and happy place. This time it was right. It would work, and no one would have to get nailed to anything.
Robert Langdon awoke slowly. A telephone was ringing in the darkness, a tinny, unfamiliar ring. He fumbled for the bedside lamp and turned it on. Squinting at his surroundings, he saw a plush Renaissance bedroom with Louis XVI furniture, hand-frescoed walls, and a colossal mahogany four-poster bed. Where the hell am I? The jacquard bathrobe hanging on his bedpost bore the monogram, Hotel Ritz Paris. Slowly, the fog began to lift. Langdon picked up the receiver. "Hello? Monsieur Langdon?" A man's voice said. "I hope I have not awoken you?" Dazed, Langdon looked at the bedside clock. It was 12:32 a.m. He had been asleep only an hour. But he felt like the dead. "This is the concierge, monsieur. I apologize for this intrusion, but you have a visitor. He insists it is urgent." Langdon still felt fuzzy. A visitor? His eyes focused now on a crumpled flyer on his bedside table. The American University of Paris. Proudly presents. An evening with Robert Langdon, Professor of Religious Symbology, Harvard University. Langdon groaned. Tonight's lecture, a slideshow about pagan symbolism hidden in the stones of Chartres Cathedral, had probably ruffled some conservative feathers in the audience.
It seems wicked to be writing business letters on such a day. We have spent a week at Mina House and made an expedition to the Fayum. The day after tomorrow we're going up the Nile to Luxor and Aswan by steamer, and perhaps on to Khartoum. When we went into Cook's this morning to see about our tickets, who do you think was the first person I saw? My American trustee, Andrew Pennington. I think you met him 2 years ago when he was over. I had no idea he was in Egypt, and he had no idea that I was, nor that I was married. My letter telling him of my marriage must have just missed him. He's actually going up the Nile on the same trip that we are. Isn't it a coincidence? Thank you so much for all you've done in this busy time. As the young man was about to turn the page, Mr. Carmichael took the letter from him. "That's all," he said. "The rest doesn't matter. Well, what do you think?" His nephew considered for a moment. Then he said, "Well, I think not a coincidence."